The blue lights hit your rear-view mirror before your brain even catches up. 1 second you're driving like any other day, maybe thinking about dinner or your next stop, and the next second your chest tightens just a little. You check your speed. Was I speeding? Did I miss a sign? Why me? You pull over, engine running. Hands suddenly feel like they don't know where to go. And then comes that walk. Slow, measured. The officer approaching your window, one hand near their belt, eyes scanning everything inside your car before they even say a word. Now let me ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself. Have you ever said something during a traffic stop that you immediately regretted the moment it left your mouth? Drop your answer in the comments, seriously. Because later on, I'm going to explain why that exact moment, what you say in those first few seconds, can completely change the outcome of a stop, and in some cases, even change the law itself. Because that's exactly what happened in the story we're about to break down. One man, one stop, one mistake, or depending on how you see it, one stand, and it reshaped how an entire state handles police encounters. But before we get there, you need to understand how these stops actually work in the real world. Not the version people imagine, not the version you see in movies, the real one, the uncomfortable one. Because most drivers walk into these situations blind. When an officer pulls you over, they're not just looking for a traffic violation. That part is already done. The stop happened. Now their job shifts. Their brain switches gears into something more investigative. They're watching your hands, your breathing, how fast you reach for your wallet, whether you avoid eye contact or make too much of it. They notice if your voice cracks, if you hesitate before answering a simple question like, "Where are you coming from?" And here's something most people don't realize. That question is almost never about your destination. It's about your reaction. Where are you coming from tonight? Seems harmless, right? Casual, friendly even. But pause for a second. Why does that matter in a speeding stop? It doesn't, not directly. What they're doing is establishing a behavioral baseline. If you answer quickly and naturally, that tells them one thing. If you pause, over-explain, or contradict yourself later, that tells them something else. And here's where people get into trouble without even realizing it. You think you're being cooperative, helpful, maybe even trying to talk your way out of it. But what you're actually doing is giving more information than necessary in a situation where every word is being quietly evaluated. Let's make this real. Officer, do you know why I stopped you? You. Maybe I was going a little fast? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get home. That sounds polite, normal, human. But what did you just do? You admitted to speeding, even if you weren't sure. And now the entire tone of the stop shifts without you noticing it. This is where things start to branch into different outcomes, and most drivers don't even realize the fork in the road exists. Because once an officer senses uncertainty or nervousness, they may start layering more questions. Have you had anything to drink tonight? Where exactly are you coming from? Is there anything illegal in the vehicle I should know about? Now you're in deeper than you expected. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Even completely innocent people start to feel pressure at this point. Your heart rate goes up, your brain starts racing. You might stumble over words or give inconsistent answers, not because you're hiding something, but because you're human. But to an officer trained to detect cues, that can look like something else entirely. And that's how a simple traffic stop turns into a prolonged roadside investigation. Now here's where the story of that one man starts to matter. Because he didn't respond the way most people do. He didn't try to explain. He didn't try to smooth things over. And more importantly, he didn't answer questions the way officers expect. And that made everything escalate. But before we get into that, let's talk about one of the biggest mistakes drivers make during stops. And it's so subtle that most people don't even recognize it as a mistake. They feel silence. There's a moment during almost every traffic stop where nothing is said. The officer walks back to their car, or stands there looking at your license, or pauses after asking a question. That silence feels heavy, awkward. And what do people do? They start talking. "Hey officer, I swear I wasn't going that fast. I've never gotten a ticket before. I'm just really tired, long day at work." You're trying to humanize yourself, and that instinct makes sense. But what you're actually doing is volunteering information without being asked. And sometimes that information creates new questions that didn't exist before. Now, I'm not saying you should be cold or hostile, That's a completely different mistake, and it can make things worse very quickly. What I'm saying is this: understand the role you're in during that moment. You're not in a casual conversation. You're in an interaction where everything you say can influence the direction of the stop. Now let's go back to that man. His stop started like any other. Alleged traffic violation. Lights. Pull over. The officer approaches. License and registration. Standard. Then comes the familiar question. Do you know why I stopped you? And instead of guessing, instead of apologizing, instead of trying to read the officer's mind, he simply says something along the lines of, I'd prefer not to answer any questions. Now right there, everything changes. Because that's not what officers expect. It's not what they're used to hearing. Most drivers either admit something or try to explain. So when someone calmly declines to answer, it introduces friction into the interaction. The officer might respond with a different tone. Why wouldn't you answer? It's a simple question. And this is where most people break, because now it feels confrontational. You feel pressure to justify yourself, to avoid making things worse. But here's the critical point. Exercising your rights can sometimes feel uncomfortable in the moment, especially when you're face to face with authority. And that discomfort is exactly why most people don't do it. This man did, and the stop escalated. The officer began asking more pointed questions, possibly repeated them, maybe even tried different phrasing to get a response. And when those answers didn't come, the situation shifted again. Because from the officer's perspective, non-cooperation can raise suspicion. Now let's pause here, because this is where a lot of misunderstanding happens. Suspicion doesn't mean guilt, but it can lead to extended detention, further questioning, or attempts to develop probable cause. This is where things get legally complex, and where that one man's actions started to ripple outward. Because the stop didn't end quickly. It turned into a longer detention, questions about the vehicle, requests to step out, possibly even attempts to search. And at some point, the line between a routine traffic stop and something more serious became blurred. This is exactly the kind of situation that ends up being challenged later. Not on the roadside, not in that moment, but in court. Because what matters isn't just what happened, it's whether what happened was lawful. Was the duration of the stop reasonable? Were the questions related to the purpose of the stop? Was there valid justification for extending the interaction? These questions don't get answered on the side of the road. They get dissected later, often in front of a judge. And in this case, the challenge went far enough to force the courts to confront something they hadn't clearly defined before. How long is too long? At what point does a traffic stop become an unlawful detention? Can an officer prolong a stop to investigate unrelated suspicions without clear justification? These are not small questions. These are foundational to how traffic stops operate across an entire state. And because this one man didn't respond the way most people do, because he didn't fill the silence, didn't offer explanations, didn't play along with the expected script, the situation exposed gaps in how the law was being applied. Now think about that for a second. Most drivers comply instinctively. They answer, they explain, they try to get through the stop as quickly as possible. And that's understandable. But it also means those edge cases, the moments where the law is tested, rarely surface. This one did, and it forced a change. Courts began setting clearer boundaries. Officers were given more defined limits on how long they could extend stops without specific, articulable reasons. The idea that a stop couldn't be prolonged just to fish for unrelated violations became more firmly established. That didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen without resistance. But it happened. Because one person chose a different path in a moment where most people follow the same script. Now, before you take that as advice to handle every stop the same way, let's bring this back to reality. Every traffic stop is different, every officer is different, and every decision you make in that moment has consequences, both immediate and long-term. There are risks to being overly talkative. There are also risks to being overly rigid or confrontational. The key is understanding what's happening, not reacting blindly. Let's talk about another situation that trips people up. The request to step out of the vehicle. Go ahead and step out for me. This catches people off guard. Your first instinct might be to ask, why, or to hesitate. But here's the reality. In most cases, officers have the authority to ask drivers, and even passengers, to exit the vehicle during a lawful stop. Refusing that can escalate things quickly. Not because you're automatically guilty of anything, but because now the interaction has shifted into non-compliance territory. And once that shift happens, everything becomes more tense. Your tone matters, your body language matters. Even the speed at which you move matters. Too slow, and it can look like hesitation or resistance. Too fast, and it can look like nervousness or aggression. There's a narrow space in between where things stay calm. Most people aren't thinking about that, but officers are trained to notice it. Now imagine combining that with earlier mistakes. Over-talking, contradicting yourself, showing visible anxiety. By the time you step out of the vehicle, the officer already has a mental picture forming. Right or wrong, it's there. And once that picture forms, it's very hard to change it in the moment. That's why the early part of the stop matters so much. Those first 30 to 60 seconds set the tone for everything that follows. And that's exactly where most people lose control of the situation without realizing it. Now, going back to that case, the one that changed the law, there's something else you need to understand. It wasn't just about what the driver did. It was about what the officer did after that. Because the law doesn't just look at driver behavior. It scrutinizes police conduct just as closely. Was the questioning reasonable? Was the delay justified? Were constitutional boundaries respected? When those answers become unclear, that's when legal challenges succeed. And when they succeed at a high enough level, policies change, training changes, procedures change, and suddenly, every traffic stop in that state operates under slightly different rules than before. All because one interaction didn't go the usual way. Now here's the part that most people miss. You don't see those changes on the roadside. The officer pulling you over tomorrow might be following guidelines shaped by cases you've never heard of. Decisions made in courtrooms quietly influence what happens on highways and city streets every day. So when you're sitting there, hands on the wheel, trying to decide how to respond to a question, you're part of a system that's constantly evolving. Your choices matter. Maybe not at that scale, but they matter. And if there's one thing I want you to take from all of this, it's this. Don't treat a traffic stop like a casual conversation. It's controlled, structured, purpose-driven. Every question has a reason, even if it's not obvious. Every answer has an impact, even if it feels small. And every moment, from the instant those blue lights appear to the second you're allowed to leave, has the potential to go in very different directions depending on how you handle it. So next time it happens, and it probably will at some point, you won't just feel that rush of anxiety and uncertainty. You'll recognize the patterns, you'll notice the pauses, you'll understand why certain questions are being asked, and maybe, just maybe, you'll handle those first few seconds a little differently. Because sometimes, the difference between a simple ticket and something much bigger starts with a single sentence, or the decision not to say one at all.